The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
You are now entering the Stone Zone. Remember when we learned during the Senate Watergate hearings, which were televised, that it was alleged that Richard Nixon had an enemies list? The editorial boards at the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Associated Press, Wall Street Journal, they had their knickers in a twist. Yet we see no commentary whatsoever about Operation Arctic Frost, which has now been fully exposed. This was an extra-constitutionally, highly illegal and seditious effort by Joe Biden, his Attorney General Merrick Garland, and deranged Jack Smith, whose appointment as special counsel was deemed by a federal judge in Florida to be unconstitutional, to target individual men and women, institutions and individuals for harassment, for surveillance, and ultimately for incarceration. Arctic Frost wasn't an investigation. It was an atrocity disguised as law. It was a deliberate choice of individuals to be targeted and to weaponize the instruments of justice against political opponents. This was a perversion of law enforcement into a machinery of fear and oppression. I believe that those who conceived it, approved it, and carried it out should be prosecuted. Joe Biden himself, Merrick Garland, the Attorney General Jack Smith, and all of their underlings. The media, now we understand why they have been constantly whining about Donald Trump being on a rampage of revenge and retaliation. It's because they fear accountability and justice. They are the ones who have perpetrated egregious crimes and unconstitutional acts. And the Americans who suffered under their grip, people like General Flynn, people like Donald Trump, people like me, I think we deserve justice. For context and deeper background, you should understand that Arctic Frost was not a mistake. It was not a bureaucratic misfire. It was a conscious act of political terror and betrayal. It left behind victims whose pain cannot be measured. It is one of the most outrageous things that I have seen in 50 years in American politics. Imagine waking up to the sound of FBI agents pounding on your door, your dogs going wild, your privacy stripped away, being frog marched out into your front yard in handcuffs, having them do the same exact thing to your wife, despite the fact that she wasn't charged with any crime and absolutely did nothing wrong. Imagine being bankrupted, humiliated, and vilified simply because you stood by your beliefs. In my case, being essentially targeted because I refused to offer false testimony against President Donald Trump. They didn't charge me because I did something wrong. They charged me because after spending $30 million on the phony Russian collusion witch hunt, they had nothing. Bupkis. They were empty-handed. So they wanted to create the crime. They wanted me to testify in regard to things that were categorically false. When the Steele dossier, which was the phony report commissioned and paid for by Hillary Clinton, proved to be a complete and total fraud, that's what they did to rationalize not only the FISA warrants spying on Donald Trump's campaign, but also the phony Robert Mueller investigation. Mueller himself, I don't care if he's non-compos mentis, he needs to be prosecuted, along with his right-hand man, Andrew Weissmann, the single most corrupt former prosecutor in American history. Very good friend of mine is writing a book and producing a documentary on Andrew Weissmann. It's called Pitbull. The single most corrupt prosecutor in U.S. history should be called Poodle, in my opinion. But the many crimes of Andrew Weissmann, who's right there in New York, are about to be exposed, from his lies to cover up mob murders to his destruction of both the Enron Corporation and their accounting firm, Arthur Andersen, where he destroyed dozens, if not hundreds of lives. Now it's time for Andrew Weissmann to be held accountable. By the way, I thoughtfully supplied Andrew Weissmann's New York address to the FBI, just in case they need to find him. It is time for I think vindication. There are American citizens here whose only crime is refusing to kneel before the corrupt establishment and who were just merely speaking out. The number of people here whose rights have been violated is extraordinary. Not only did Jack Smith spy on 8 Republican U.S. senators, including Lindsey Graham, not my favorite, Bill Hagerty, Josh Hawley, Dan Sullivan, great Alabama Senator and coach Tom Tuberville, Ron Johnson, Cynthia Loomis, Marsha Blackburn. These are the very best people in the U.S. Senate. These tend to be the MAGA senators. This was a monstrous violation of privacy and a direct assault on the separation of powers. There were no warrants to justify it. No legitimate predicate supported it. No moral conscience could actually defend it. This was tyranny in its rawest form, the same kind of state-sponsored repression that history remembers in totalitarian regimes in Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia. The newly released FBI records have exposed the staggering scope of this political hit list. Over 197 subpoenas were issued in the Arctic Frost operation, targeting more than 430 individuals and organizations, including approximately 160 Republicans, of which I was one, 45 of whom were also close allies of Donald Trump, and about 111 who were alternative electors, campaign staff, state legislators. Among those swept up in the Arctic Frost hit list were Turning Point USA and their founder, the late Charlie Kirk, a very good friend of mine, the Republican National Committee, the Republican Attorney General's Associations. Investigators even sought phone records on Donald Trump, Vice President Mike Pence, and senior aides. These subpoenas primarily sought call metadata, not content, for the critical period of January 4th through 6th. That would be around the Electoral College meeting and certifying the election of Joe Biden. The information that was released was finally extracted from FBI files released by Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa. This is corroborated by various whistleblower disclosures and additional internal Department of Justice documents. The people who were targeted were activists, nonprofit directors, faith-based leaders, and private citizens swept into this Orwellian dragnet simply because of their political beliefs. The data collected on us was stored, indexed, and shared internally within the Justice Department. Our names were marked as subjects of interest in a campaign to freeze opposition to the ruling party. This is something that you could see Adolf Hitler doing or Joe Stalin. You would not think that Joe Biden did this, but Joe Biden is going to argue that he's mentally incompetent and that he cannot stand trial for these charges. I mean, among those other high-profile individuals targeted in this campaign of intimidation and lawfare were General Michael Flynn, Jeff Clark, the White House lawyer, Peter Navarro, former Mayor Rudy Giuliani, my good friend, the Pennsylvania activist Leah Hoops. All of us stood with President Donald Trump's cause when many others recoiled. We came to the resistance when others cowered. So the regime came for us. The regime also came for the organizations aligned with Donald Trump's campaign and his political movement. They also targeted other media outlets. This is an extra-constitutionally, highly illegal, highly unconstitutional operation that has to be addressed. FBI agents actually seized the cell phone of Congressman Scott Perry. That's a violation of the Separation of Powers Act. They not only invaded his personal privacy, but they violated the sanctity of the U.S. Constitution. That phone contained correspondence with constituents, family members, political allies. To pry into it without cause, to pry into it without any probable cause, and without a warrant is a proof that Joe Biden had gone out of his mind. Their plan was not to face Donald Trump in the 2020 election. The 2024 election, pardon me. You can recall this one scene when they asked Biden if that was his plan, and he broke into a broad grin. He was even asked at one point, aren't you worried about defeating Donald Trump in the next election? And Biden kind of mumbled, we're not going to let him run. And that was always the plan. The revelations that we have learned here are so egregious that even veteran investigative reporters have sounded the alarm. Journalists like Catherine Herridge posted the newly released oversight documents highlighting the FBI targeted not only lawmakers and politicians, but also nonprofits and faith-based organizations with no connection or record whatsoever to criminal conduct. It is stunning, the abuse that we have seen here. But the question really is, will anybody be held accountable? Attorney General Pam Bondi, Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, the ball is in your court. If there's not prosecutions of those who engaged in this egregious illegal activity, well, then you too have to be replaced. I am giving them both the benefit of the doubt. The president's views are absolutely clear. He wants anyone who engaged in the abuse of power, engaged in the obstruction of justice, or engaged in a seditious conspiracy against rights, who are in the federal government, to be prosecuted. Those who are behind this nefarious plot to undo the Constitution, to remove a sitting president, there must be no hiding place or quiet retirement or return to academia, no think tank sinecure, no paid gig as a legal analyst on MSNBC or CNN for them. Let them never step into a courtroom, lecture hall, or boardroom without being reminded of what they did to their fellow citizens. Let congressional hearings drag this all into the daylight. Let every internal email, memo, and directive be published for the entire world to see. Let there be televised testimony so the American people can watch the faces of those who corrupted their government in real time and who abused the public trust. Let future generations study Arctic Frost as a case study in how easily evil can be cloaked in legality. The architects of Arctic Frost deserve no sympathy, no defense, and no forgiveness until they face the consequences of their crimes. I really believe they must be prosecuted, they have to be fully exposed, and they must be remembered not as officials, but as offenders. The American people must rise now in defense of those who were victimized and demand that this wicked machinery of lawfare be dismantled once and for all. The Republic will survive only if justice is restored, and the evil of Arctic Frost and those who planned it is condemned as one of the most abhorrent stains on the history of our great country. When we come back, President Trump has reached a historic tariff deal with China, which is an excellent sign. We'll bring you the inside skinny on that when we get back into the Stone Zone. Whatever you do, don't touch your dial, because we'll be right back with a special report on the president's triumphant tour of Asia.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back into the Stone Zone. Hey, listen up here. We're asking you to sound off on the big issues impacting this upcoming election. From now through Election Day, please go to redappleaudionetworks.com/election. That's redappleaudionetworks.com/election. And cast your vote. We're talking crime, cost of living, transportation, anti-Semitism, all of the top issues in this upcoming election. Today's question: how important are mass transit policies, buses, trains, and subways? Cuomo supports raising wages to strengthen the city's workforce. Mamdani wants to eliminate fares on all New York City buses, making transit a tax-funded public service. So how important are transit policies to you? Once again, please go to redappleaudionetworks.com/election and cast your vote now. We want to know what you think. Following a meeting in China with the Chinese leader Xi Jinping, President Donald Trump has come to an agreement with China to facilitate rare earth mineral exports into the U.S. in return to sell American soybean products in Chinese markets and to jointly crack down on the flow of fentanyl into America. President Trump will be cutting taxes on China as part of this landmark trade agreement. This once again proves that Donald Trump is a peacemaker and one of the great businessmen and negotiators of all time. The Russians had really, the Chinese had really begun to corner the market on the rare earth minerals that we need to make so many vital American products, things like batteries, for example. The Biden administration either was in on it or they seemed to be asleep at the switch as the Chinese locked up these markets. But the president launched a rare earth minerals initiative within his administration. We've been making a number of strategic investments in rare earth mineral mining operations around the world. And now the president has reached an agreement with the Chinese in which they will be selling us their rare earth minerals. We, in return, will be selling agricultural products there. President Trump said after his meeting, I had a truly great meeting with President Xi of China. There's enormous respect between our two countries, and that will only be enhanced with what just took place. We agreed on many things, with others, even of high importance, being very close to being resolved. I was extremely honored by the fact that President Xi authorized China to begin the purchase of massive amounts of soybeans, sorghum, and other important farm products. Our farmers will be very happy. As I said, in fact, from the very first days of my administration, farmers should immediately go out and buy more land and larger tractors. President Donald Trump, ultimately the optimist. As part of his agreement, President Trump has put putative fentanyl-linked tariffs cut them in half. President Trump spent the last several days in places like South Korea and Japan being treated very warmly and signing consequential trade deals in the lead up to his meeting with Chairman Xi, who had previously, I want to point out, been intransient in terms of his dealing with President Trump. But I think seeing the amount of goodwill Trump has built in the region is what caused Chairman Xi to blink first, as we knew he would. The trade war with China is far from over. We shouldn't think it is, but we have won this particular round because of the strong, visionary leadership of President Donald J. Trump. I'm Roger Stone. You're listening to the Stone Zone. Don't go away, because we'll be right back.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
We're back in the Stone Zone. I got into a little bit of an X, we used to call it Twitter, an X-tiff with my friend Laura Loomer this week. Laura Loomer is highly opinionated, and just to be clear, I think the Muslim Brotherhood should absolutely be identified as a terrorist group, and they should be highly illegal, as do I believe Antifa should be. And no, I do not take a soft line against dangerous Islamic terrorism. But Laura Loomer's unhinged and baseless attacks on Tulsi Gabbard, who I think served this country on the battlefield in Iraq with distinction, as well as Afghanistan, I believe, and goes on to distinguish herself through the declassification of all the documents that prove that the Russian collusion hoax was the largest single abuse of power in American history, deserves more respect. I know who the neocons are who are paying Laura Loomer for these unhinged attacks on Tulsi Gabbard, and sooner or later I will disclose that. The good news is it looks to me like Antifa will be designated as a foreign terrorist group. On September 22nd, President Donald Trump designated Antifa as a domestic terrorist organization. This was 12 days after Turning Point USA founder Charlie Kirk was gunned down by an assassin who is said to have links to far-left extremist groups. President Trump has also indicated that he believes it would be appropriate to designate Antifa as a foreign terrorist group, considering their international scope and activities causing revolutionary violence and mayhem around the world. Now, Senator Eric Schmidt, he's one of the good guys, elaborated on Antifa's worldwide footprint, outlining in a letter to Secretary of State Marco Rubio how this is a global foreign terror group and should be designated by the federal government as such. Regarding Antifa, Schmidt said they have an international network of safe houses. Antifa is not an idea, as Christopher Wray, the FBI director, who should soon be facing charges for his many, many lies under oath to Congress, and his other illegal involvement in Arctic frost, for example. Antifa is not an idea, it's an organization. I think if we're serious about taking on political violence, that they are the tip of the spear. So I believe designating them as an international network of terrorists is absolutely necessary. Democrat lawmakers have simultaneously, of course, defended the dangerous illegal actions of Antifa terrorists while claiming that the organization doesn't exist. How can you have it both ways? This double-speak tactic is meant to cover for the organization, who are their actual shock troops. They like that. Antifa thugs are out there terrorizing ICE agents who are carrying out their responsibilities and trying to make it more difficult for them to deport illegals because they want the illegals to remain in America so they can first bribe them with government benefits, then later grant them amnesty and have them become voters, citizens and voters, to be a secure voting bloc that would then ensure a permanent majority for the Democrats. Anyone who claims that Antifa is an idea and not an organization literally needs to have their head examined. The Antifa groups should be cracked down upon because they are dangerous, they are illegal, they are advocating mayhem and violence and death. This is not about free speech. This is about violent terrorism against the American people, and it cannot be tolerated. Again, Attorney General Pam Bondi and Deputy Attorney Todd Blanche, please do your duty. The president's been very clear on his position regarding Antifa. Google, one of the Silicon Valley giants, was put on the hot seat in a Senate committee hearing as one of their top executives admitted that they made errors when they implemented their Orwellian censorship following the dubious and disputed 2020 presidential election. Google's Government Affairs and Public Policy Centers of Excellence leader, Markham Erickson, was confronted with YouTube's policy to censor any content that claimed that there was any, quote, widespread fraud or errors or glitches during the 2020 election. Erickson stated that when the chance of world harm had dissipated, we removed that policy. Erickson admitted that Google was in error, but refused to say what that error was. It wasn't an error. This was a willful attempt to silence anyone who refused to bow to the conventional wisdom narrative and the official narrative of the Biden administration that no one had the right to question the outcome of the 2020 election. Just to be clear, every American citizen has a First Amendment free speech right to question the anomalies and irregularities in the 2020 election. The idea that the formulation of an alternative state elector slate is a crime is a crock. Going back to 1877 and the Electoral College Act of that year, and examine even as recently the 1960 elections, it has always been legal when there is a dispute over the outcome of the results of a presidential election in any individual state. While there is pending legal action regarding that outcome, the formation of an alternative elector slate is a way to preserve your constitutional rights and to preserve your electoral possibilities if you won that litigation. But Jack Smith and Merrick Garland and Joe Biden decided to make this a crime. It is not a crime. It never was a crime. Then they have lowlifes like Ari Melber out there demanding that people be arrested. Ari Melber said in several shows that Roger Stone should be elected in the Georgia fake elector probe. I was never in Georgia after the election. I know nothing about it. But then Ari Melber, you could always tell when that guy's lying. His lips are moving. You get tired of the fake news narrative constantly, and the Googles and the Instagrams and the fake Facebooks, they were all in on it. You see, if your views did not line up with the conventional wisdom narrative pushed by the Biden administration, well, then you had to be silenced. You had to be canceled. You had to be debanked. You would actually cease to be a person. Now, in their attempts to defend themselves, Erickson, the Google executive being grilled in the Senate, said that terrorist content, child sex abuse material, hate speech, and other harmful content have no place on our platforms. To be crystal clear, we develop and enforce our policies independently. That is a right we enjoy as a matter of law. We know this to be completely false, Mr. Erickson. As we saw in the case of Twitter, now X, the government worked hand in hand with the website's executives to censor and cancel individuals, and that's just as true in the case of Google as it was in the case of. He went on to say, we recognize our responsibility to have policies against content that we conclude is illegal, offensive, and dangerous. This comes back to those key words, hate speech. You see, anything they disagree with, they call hate speech. So in other words, Google has acted as big brother here completely on their own. They need to be held culpable for the double standards they're implementing, suppressing conservative content creators while pouring rocket fuel on woke, DEI, anti-white, child transgender garbage that is regularly being pushed on their platforms. Where is your discernment when it comes to that? Oh, it doesn't exist. It's time for Google to lose the immunities that they have under Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act and no longer be treated like a neutral publisher under the law, because they aren't one. They should be responsible for what they post. They should be subject to lawsuits, as they should be, for being a partisan publishing operation that operates not in the furtherance of free speech, but in efforts to limit free speech. You see what's going on in Canada. The Canadian Attorney General, Sean Fraser, recently stated that he wants criminal penalties against individuals who, quote, promote hatred against others on social media. So in other words, if you criticize the Canadian government and its authoritarian policies, they would call that hate speech, making you subject to criminal penalties. You already see this in Britain. If a person in Britain criticizes radical Islam in any public forum whatsoever, they will be arrested, they will be tried quickly, and they will be jailed. If you don't think that's coming to America, then you really don't understand what's going on in the world. Fraser in Canada made his comments while testifying in favor of Bill C-9, a bill that would make it a criminal act to, quote, willfully promote hatred against a group of people in public displays. So in other words, if you criticize Sharia law, that would be called hate speech. That's not what we want in America. But notice that Canada is always one step ahead of us. By that I mean very recently, the Canadian government required anyone who owns any type of firearm to register not only the make, brand, model, but also the location of that firearm with the Canadian government. Why would the government need that information? Why would they be required to have that information? I think we know what the next step is, which is the confiscation of those weapons, which I believe are constitutionally protected by the Canadian Constitution. We have a Second Amendment here in this country that offers us the same protections. So what the Biden and Obama administration did was crack down on those who manufacture ammunition. That way, one cannot defend themselves or their family if necessary if they have a firearm quite legally, but they don't have the ammunition that it requires. Very clever. I see this heavy yoke of censorship as a key tactic of the radical left. We talked earlier about Operation Arctic Frost. I was targeted in that. You haven't really lived until you hear the FBI pounding on your door at 6 o'clock in the morning, and you realize that there's a blaze of light outside and a CNN camera crew steps from your front door. It really wakes you up as to the dangers that exist in these totalitarian attitudes of the Democrats. No place is this more manifest than our neighbors to the north. It is, I think, terrifying when you look at the full scope of what the Biden Justice Department was up to, particularly what they tried to do to one Donald J. Trump. You see, they didn't just want to beat him in an election. They wanted to strip him of his wealth, they wanted to bar him from the ballot, and they wanted to throw him in jail, all for crimes that they fabricated. So the question now is, will we have accountability and justice, or will we just move on? I think it is vitally important for the Republicans' chances in the midterm elections. If they want to mobilize this great base of the common sense people of America, then there has to be accountability for these past crimes. And quote unquote journalists like Peter Baker of the New York Times, who say Trump is bent on a tour of revenge and retaliation, he scoffed at and mocked, because that is nonsensical. Listening to Roger Stone right here on the Stone Zone and the Red Apple Audio Networks, and we'll be right back.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back into the Stone Zone, where every weekday we talk news, politics, history, style, food. We touch on it all. I benefit from 50 years in the corroded rectum of the two-party system. I've seen it all, and I'm the ultimate political junkie. So we give you our incisive, I would say, forward-thinking analysis of the political events of the day every single day here on the Stone Zone. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stated during the week that he needs support from the NATO allies in Europe to continue the Ukraine-Russia conflict for at least 2 to 3 more years, as apparently he won't be happy until every single Ukrainian man, woman, and child is killed in this war. Zelensky says, "I emphasize this again to all European leaders. I told them we are not going to fight for decades, but you must show that for some time you'll be willing to provide stable financial support to Ukraine. And that is why they have a program in mind for 2 or 3 years. If the war ends in a month, we'll spend this money on recovery. If it does not end in a month," Zelensky said, "and after some time, we will spend it on weapons. We simply have no other choice." The entire premise for this war that you've been told is completely and totally false. This is not about the territorial ambitions of Vladimir Putin and the Russians. It is about the fact that when the Russians agreed to the reunification of East and West Germany, we in turn signed an agreement with Russia, the Budapest Memorandum, in which we very specifically promised not to push Ukraine into NATO, which is to say, we agreed not to put NATO missiles funded by you, the American taxpayers, on the ground pointed at Russia. We reaffirm this again in the Minsk Accords, both of those agreements signed under President George H.W. Bush. And the Biden administration has violated those agreements by pushing relentlessly to include Ukraine into NATO, which really means to drop missiles into the silos that have already been built on the ground aimed at Russia. That is what this conflict is really about. Then we learned that there were these globalist labs producing God knows what kind of deadly viruses across Ukraine. We actually had a Biden Assistant Secretary of State confirm that by mistake in a Senate hearings, these bioweapons labs. These are also in violation of our agreements. So, look, President Donald Trump is trying urgently to end this war. He is the ultimate negotiator. Just reading it from the outside, I think every time he has the Russians set up to where he needs them, Zelensky falls apart. Then by the time he gets Zelensky to a reasonable place for negotiations, the Russians have backed off. This is a thorny knot, but I trust Donald Trump given his incredible record so far. I mean, he reached peace agreements between India and Pakistan. He got a ceasefire between Israel and Iran. He ended the conflict between Egypt and Ethiopia. He successfully ended the war between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. He negotiated a ceasefire between Cambodia and Thailand. He ended the hostilities between Armenia and Azerbaijan. This is an incredible record of peace, for which I continue to believe that he is the one who actually deserves the Nobel Peace Prize. But, of course, that globalist group of Norwegian elites is not going to give him that award. But the American people know, and the American people know that he's working every day to end this deadly conflict. I want to go back to something that Elon Musk said, which was also echoed by Congressman Tim Burchett, and that is how much of the money that we sent to Zelensky went either up his nose or into the pockets of his cronies or into the pockets of elites here in the United States who were in bed with him. Zelensky is a puppet of the globalist interests. He's backed by Europe because they want that national security NATO money. There's a pool of $890 billion sitting there that those governments are anxious to divvy up because, well, they're going to steal a lot of it. Let's be very clear. Vladimir Putin is a bad guy and Russia is a totalitarian regime. No one is making excuses for him. But to be certain, we should not risk World War III just to provoke him. It is time, in my opinion, to cut Zelensky and the Ukrainians off from the welfare that continues to sustain them. His megalomaniacal delusions should not concern us any longer. It's time to defund Zelensky, in my opinion, and let the people of Ukraine take care of him from there. He keeps postponing an election. Do you know why? Because he cannot be reelected. So don't tell us that this war is about democracy and freedom. It is about nothing of the kind. That's the Stone Cold Truth. You can hear it 5 days a week right here in the Stone Zone on the Red Apple Audio Networks. Thanks for joining us, and until tomorrow, God bless you and Godspeed.
Thanks for listening to The Stone Zone with Roger Stone. You can hear The Stone Zone with Roger Stone weeknights at 8 on 77 WABC. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode, so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?